Good morning, everybody. And I told you guys when I said yesterday that I was back, that the podcasts were going to keep coming. And lo and behold, we had a kit launch today. So I couldn't think of anybody better to have on than our wonderful friend Rob Warner from the Spark Academy. And Rob obviously has been involved in tons and tons of short designs throughout the course of the years. And we're delighted to have him back on. You eagle-eyed watchers and listeners will know that he was here this time last year when we released the last Kappa kit. And we're delighted to have him back on to give us his pearls of wisdom about the Castore kit. But before we get into that, Rob, how's things in your life?
All right, cheers, mate. Pleased to be back with you, and excited to have a little look through this kit and see what we can say about it.
Yeah, and Paddy has been an eagle-eyed watcher because I got a message from Paddy saying, keep an eye on your phone or keep an eye on Twitter. And then like 35 seconds later, bang, it came up and it was like, we were part of the journey or whatever the big monologue was that was there with Tyrone Mings with his head down and the news broke. So Paddy the soothsayer got his date right again, because on the podcast last night, we were kind of talking going, they have to release it tomorrow. If they don't release it tomorrow, we'll be playing in shirts and skins against Walsall on Saturday. But yeah, Paddy, we'll get your thoughts on the kit as well. But first inclination, or the first, I suppose, incarnation of what the club is going to do with Castore. We've all seen the knockoff kits. We've all seen everybody, pointing them out in Magaluf or Turkey or wherever the hell people have been over the course of the summer. And obviously there was pushback from the club on that to say that wasn't going to be the design. And lo and behold, we have the design now, and it is slightly different. But Rob, I'm going to come to you first with regards to your first impressions on I suppose the traditional nature, the traditional look of the shirt itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It is a very traditional shirt. I'll keep averting my eyes that way because I've got a big picture of it for me to refer to, because obviously, like everybody else, I've not had my hands on it yet. I think assuming this is a multi-year deal, there we go. Then it does make a lot of sense to go very traditional in the first year of a kit deal, because usually when a team changes kit supplier, you would see a natural uptick in sales, whether that's because the change of supplier logo means that you're less likely to wear the previous season's kit or whatever. Not entirely sure, but usually you would expect a spike in the first year, and then seasons 2, 3, 4 onwards, then you have to try a little bit harder to maintain those levels. So that's where the designs then start to get a little bit more wacky and interesting season on season. But first impressions are that it's pretty nice. I think the proof of it will be getting hands on it, because there isn't a huge amount of detail on the replica from what we can see from the pictures. So I would then hope that the fabric and the manufacturing quality are going to make up for that. But yeah, until we touch it, it's going to be hard to say.
That's a good point you just mentioned there. So obviously we're seeing Tyrone Mings, Jacob Ramsey, and it's still bonkers to see Philippe Coutinho in an Aston Villa shirt. It still
suits him now.
Really, yeah, it does. Yeah, and long may he continue to wear it with great aplomb, especially when he's jumping into the whole end after scoring last-minute winners throughout the course of next season. But it will be interesting. Like obviously, when we get onto those Chevron designs and stuff like that, but those little kind of intricacies that you can see on the player issue shirt that they have there at the moment, I suppose it is going to be really interesting to see if that is there on the replica, and if the replica has all those little bells and whistles as well. Because you just want it to kind of, and you may or may not be able to do this, but when a team or when a club is looking at maybe the pro type shirt, which we know is 130 euros, I'm going to call it euros here, I think it's 110 pounds.
Right.
And then obviously you've got your replica shirt. What kind of decisions go into what we're going to take away from the pro shirt and put in the replica shirt? Or does it even come down to that detail? Is it really just a price point conversation?
A lot of it does. A lot of it does. There would tend to be decision making. So it's interesting to see the really detailed crest has carried over that we've seen over the last few years, which is great. I think the execution of it is really nice. Kappa took the same approach with it last season. If anybody saw the kit review that we did on our Spark Design Academy YouTube channel, you'll have seen me waxing lyrical about that as a badge execution, and it stands up against any other badge execution that would go on any of the top teams from the top brands around the world. It's really that nice. So it was great to see that that's being kept on, being adopted again. Quite often what you would see is that on the pro level shirts, it's really about stripping weight away from the product as much as possible. So a lot of the things that the fans would see as being valuable, like an embroidered logo or an embroidered crest, they're just no use for the athletes. You know, it adds weight, it can add irritation. And a lot of the kind of pro level shirts, they're not designed to have the same lifespan as a replica. So you'd get heavier fabric, you'd lose some of the details that are perhaps heat applied. So like the little laser cut holes we can see in the side of the image there, you know, if you were to put that shirt in the tumble dryer or wash it too many times with soft rinse in it or whatever, then, you know, those little frames to the holes would more than likely come off. So there's a lot of different considerations to place between the two. So normally you would expect, you know, like putting those perforations in the shirt does cost money. You know, the amount of time something takes adds to the cost of a football shirt. And laying out a piece of fabric in an oxygen-free environment to then put laser holes through it and then make sure that the little frames sit directly in the right place. It takes time, and it all adds to the cost and all adds to the athletic performance.
Are those holes, call me stupid, are they just air vents?
They are just air vents, as far as I am aware. Yeah.
I just thought maybe because if some players are going to come back in bad shape, that maybe there were lace holes that they could lace them up as they lost weight throughout the course of the year.
Yeah,
you know,
like
tighten it in like a corset. Yeah,
That'd
yeah.
be perfect, wouldn't it? Yeah. No, I mean, there's key areas on the body that you want to ventilate through a football shirt. I mean, and they're pretty straightforward. That you are looking essentially down the centre of the back and then underneath the arms, usually the upper neck and perhaps the chest. So no surprise to see that they've gone direct and made holes in the fabric to achieve that.
What was I going to ask you there? I had another question as I was flicking through. I'm hoping that the pictures are gonna remind me of what my question was. Yes, this is what it was. It kind of reminds me, and Paddy, you might have thoughts on this as well. It kind of reminds me of the 2007, 2008, or 2008, 2009 shirt, the old Nike one with, I think it was the first Acorns type shirt, and it has that kind of simplicity as well. And I think you mentioned there, Rob, with regards to, you know, changing shirt supplier. I think this is the first time that when we had Nike, it was they went traditional like this, and this kind of reminds me of the same application, specifically the collar. I think the collar, although it has a slight V in it, the collar on that old shirt was a round neck collar, and I was a big fan of it. Paddy, am I right in thinking it's the same type of shirt as that?
Yeah, similar, apart from there's a slight V neck in what we're looking at here. It was a round neck on that original Acorn shirt, from what I can remember. You know, just to reiterate what Rob just said, it's safe, and the Force one usually is. We've seen it with Kappa, we've seen it with Under Armour in recent years. Big fan of that Forced Under Armour one where they put the line through the short. I suppose the big thing for me is the crest. We looked at so many mock-ups of what it was with a fairly nondescript crest and just printed onto the short. So I'm glad to see they went that extra mile and paid that little bit extra to put that embossed crest made of what is essentially rubber. And there's good longevity in that crest. We've seen a lot of the stuff wear away on jackets and coats, on the Kappa stuff as time went on, and people just don't read, you know, and without annoying all the females of watch our podcasts, they tend to throw everything in together, which I do myself, but I don't wash anything over 30 degrees, so I've never had anything come off the shirt of any type. So my only concern for this one is that little search drive smile is something we could see peeling off very quickly.
Rob, what's your view on, and this is probably more personal, I think, more than a professional view. Like, I'm not gone on slogans. I think the brand gets enough from having their brand name there. I think the slogan kind of looks a bit silly, but it's not going to be a deal breaker for me. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, ideally you wouldn't have a sponsor, you know, obviously, but you know, needs must. And I think that last season I was really pleased. The Kazoo logo actually is pretty simple. It's quite a nice logo, inoffensive. It's not a brand that you'd be ashamed of, like some of the betting companies that we've had in the past. So obviously they will have made some sort of choice around brand awareness as to why they want that underneath it. I did see a comment on one of the message boards earlier saying that the poster had assumed that perhaps Kazoo were paying more now to have that underneath than just the logo, but that wouldn't be the case. There's a certain amount of space that's available based on the regulations. It's available to be sold. Depending on the competition you're in, that space gets measured in different ways. So it could be that it's measured entirely as a rectangle there. It could be two separate rectangles, one for the Kazoo and one for the Search Drive Smile. But I would be confident that there's no extra money. It's just Kazoo paid for 200 square centimeters on the front of a Villa shirt, and within reason they can put what they want inside that.
That's really interesting. The fact that all they would need to do is go, all right, so the Kazoo part, we'll just shorten the font on that. We'll change it from 40 to 30, and then we'll put this underneath. So it's done on a square. It does make sense. I suppose it does make sense because when you go to like maybe the Brazilian league or even in Ligue 1 in France, where they're literally walking billboards at times, it makes sense that they would maximize the amount of space that they would have in the shirt.
Oh, and to measure it as well. I mean, you talk about changing font size, but it's even more precise than that. Like working at the brand end of it, you have to go to the far end of a fart to get that exactly right, because they're paying a lot of money and they want every available millimeter fully taken up. Working back at Puma back in the day where we were kitting out Lazio and the sponsor was Siemens, and Siemens head office wasn't too far from the Puma office. And every season their marketing guy would come down and see the final prototype of the shirt and get his tape measure out and measure that it was as big as it possibly could be. And he wouldn't even have it. The one time we were about 0.5 square centimeters shy of the legal limit. And he wouldn't have it that it could just be that it had been on the heat press for a second too long and shrunk a tiny bit. So yeah, it's, I mean, they pay big bucks for that. You're talking millions of pounds. So of course they want it as visible as possible.
And look, we're not going all in on them. It's important to have a sponsor there, and I think it's important that it's not a betting sponsor. I much prefer to have Kazoo there than a betting sponsor. I just think it's a little bit too busy and takes away from what essentially is a decent enough kit. It's the only bad thing I can see about the kit. The Kazoo does look a little bit higher than normal as well, which is not there.
Again, there's a certain amount of positioning that you're allowed. I think it might be a little bit of a misnomer in terms of it looking higher, because Kappa typically place their crests and logos higher on the shirt anyway. So I wouldn't be surprised if you laid them side by side, and I think the sponsor logos would be in a similar position, but you'd probably find that Castore and the Villa logo were further down the shirt than they were the last 2 years.
Yeah, my biggest thing with having the logo where it is that I'm a full-chested individual, and I don't think if you say that the brand marketing guys, they would never pay for me with Kazoo because they'd have it all over the place. So it'd be like looking at it through a house of funny mirrors or something. But look,
that picture there actually is perfect, Neil. That you talk about being a fuller-chested guy, and I think you can see there's a seam that comes up the side of the shirt. The one, and you can see how it's kind of curved to go into the armhole. So normally that would be something that I would typically only expect to see on women's wear, that shape, and you'd use opposing curves in that area to create a three-dimensional shape around the bust. So it's not quite what you'd call a princess seam, but it's getting pretty close into that. And so I think you can see it's coming. It looks like it's coming a little bit further across on the women's wear, perhaps to help create that shape. So I'd be really interested to see whether that is just two flat panels that will sit together, and they've done it because they need to cut off the chevrons and they need to cut it off before it gets to the side, so there's not a mismatch, or whether they've followed what I assume they've done with the women's and make it 3-dimensional, because if you've got pecs like Tyrone Mings, then it'll really emphasize that and you'll look stunning. If you've got whatever it is I've got inside this polo shirt, it is not going to look cool.
The one thing that kind of gets me, look at it, and I'm not going to buy a woman's top, okay? Before anyone suggests it in the comments, no, I'm not going to do it. But I can see, like you can see here, that little kickback that you said there on the actual seam is more pronounced than on the woman's top there. But kind of what gets me, and you'll be able to tell me this here, is that obviously those chevrons are at 45-degree angles, or like they're 90-degree. It's a 90-degree angle. And coming from an all design background, the fact that this isn't at a 90-degree angle, and I know it probably can't. Well, I know it can't be, because if it was at 45-degree angle, because if it was, it would probably wouldn't go into the armhole correctly.
So for a start,
yeah, absolutely. So that's just a little thing for me. But it's those little details, as you say, those little intricacies of things that we wouldn't spot.
Yeah, I think that the other thing looking at that is there seems to be quite a lot of what we would call seam puckering going into that seam. It doesn't look flat, which, given that's a marketing image, I would have expected that they would have at least photoshopped that out. Every athlete, every body is individual, so it may be that it's something that's just unique because of the shape of Phil Coutinho's body, but it can also be a sign of poor workmanship. And again, it's a photograph. I've not had hands on the shirt at all. But puckering can be that usually one piece of material has been stretched. When you're joining two together, one's been stretched and the other hasn't. And when the stretched one pings back, it causes the other one to pucker along the side. So as that's appearing in a curved seam, it is possible that that's happened. So it might be something to look out for when you're in the club shop tomorrow buying your replica shirts, is to have a look and see if they are all the same, if this is just a one-off, or if some of them have been better handled in the factory than others, in which case, make sure you're picking up the ones where it's all nicely joined together and flat.
It's hard to determine whether these are the pro shorts or the shorts that we will actually buy to fit our bodies, because they're not exactly stuck to the skin. Now it could be a Photoshop as well. Like, I can't imagine they've gone to Brazil to give Coutinho one of these shorts to put on, but it certainly looks like that it's a stadium fit or whatever. Is it Castore or Castore?
Castore, as far as I'm aware, yeah. So, okay, I mean, the athletes appear to be wearing the pro shirts because of the ventilation holes, which I don't believe, and obviously it's pretty new news, and I've been working all morning. So if they've replicated those holes on the replicas, then I would take that back. But yeah, it's, from my understanding, the perforations only appear on the pro level shirt. That would be in keeping with what they put on Wolves and Newcastle last year. I think what's interesting is last year when we were doing our kit reviews, we tried to get the athlete issue shirts for both Wolves and Newcastle, and they weren't commercially available. So it'd be interesting to see whether that's the case for those two clubs again this season, or if Villa have kind of broken ranks and commercialised that pro shirt.
That's an interesting one for you, Rob, because actually, Paddy, you go ahead, because I'm probably going to break to a different topic completely here.
No, because we've discovered in the last couple of weeks that there's been different deals done with different clubs.
That was it,
yeah. So Wolves have produced their own kit, so that's obviously why they haven't had that available. But just a quick question on the chevrons. The club say purple chevrons within the fabric represent the impressive honours won throughout the club's prestigious history. What do you make of that?
What a load of bollocks, honestly.
I have a theory.
Again, without having got my hands on it, if within those chevrons it's got text and dates and whatever else, if there is,
no,
yeah, it doesn't.
It certainly doesn't look like it.
It would be absolutely incredible. I mean, if this was a Birmingham shirt and they'd got them on, and that was the press release, Twitter would be alive with people saying it represented all the relegations that they've had over the years. With it pointing downwards. But I don't know. I mean, I think when Castore first launched as a brand a few years ago, and they had a really small offering of products that was purely for individual athletes, gym, run. It was made out of amazing fabrics, largely from Italian mills. It was made at a factory in Portugal that's kind of one of the top two best sportswear manufacturers in the world. And even then, some of the product descriptions felt a little bit overworked. It was like they were trying too hard to sell the product rather than, there's nothing wrong with it. If that just looks nice on the shirt, just own it. We don't need to be sold the dream, but if there is some amazing hidden meaning behind it, all credit to them. I'd love to find out more about what it is and why the chevrons, represent the particular successes that we've had.
Well, Rob, pull up a chair because you're about to meet History Corner with Neil Dunworth today, right? I did a bit of Googling on what chevrons actually mean and what they are. And apparently, when you look at what the arm patches and the patches that people wear in the army, the chevrons determine their rank in the army. So it's the honors that they've gotten as they've climbed the ranks in the army. Yep. Now, where the hell that comes into Aston Villa Football Club, I have no idea. But
one thing I checked when I read the press release was, I thought, well, perhaps they've been super clever, and there's a certain amount of lines to represent the amount of trophies or different thicknesses of the chevrons, depending on 7 FA Cup wins, 1 European Cup win, and so on. But there isn't. It just appears to be a repeat pattern, which would then seem to indicate that depending what size shirt you buy will dictate how many trophies you're allowed to celebrate from the past. So yeah, I don't know. It's a bit of a funny one, that.
I don't think anybody would have questioned it if they just left it the way it was and just said there's chevrons on it. Initially, I thought it was a bit of a hat tip to the old Hummel design that we had back in the 80s and 90s. But look, it is what it is. It's not a bad design. It looks nice. Yeah, it does. I like it. I'll be interested to see how it looks on my slightly rounded belly, where the chevrons wouldn't be pointing exactly straight down. But we'll have a look when it comes to it.
It's just
you might want to replicate that princess seam all the way down the side.
Rob, you made a great point here. You started talking about Castore there a moment ago, and I had actually a question on that, the brand itself, and I suppose more so the industry and the fact that, and it's great actually because you might have preempted that question when you started talking about it, and I got a bit excited when you said that they had high quality materials and so on. So I really want to see what this looks like when I do get my hands on it as well. But is it normal for a company that's like literally they're on a monumental, phenomenal kind of rise, for two guys who started the company in 2015, as you said, started off with personal kind of gear and things like that, got in with Andy Murray, now in with, basically you can't turn the corner without seeing Castore now. They're with McLaren, they're with, they've got how many, 6-7 football clubs now, England
cricket teams.
Cricket, I think
West Indies cricket as well.
Yeah, so like, is that typical to have that massive, aggressive kind of explosion onto the market like Castore have had? Because it's not normal. Well, I haven't noticed it, but for somebody in the industry like you, do you notice that happens? And does that encourage longevity within the brand, or is it kind of a sign that it's still kind of 50-50 whether they will actually stand the test of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can only speculate on this, and it's important for me to put that caveat in there. It is unusual to see a brand, even without thinking about sponsoring professional athletes and organizations, to first off go after so many different sports and so many different types of sports within the first few years, because it seemed it was about running and gym essentially when they launched. And then they got some investment from some amazing people. They had, I think, a guy that had been the CEO of M&C Saatchi, obviously huge marketing and PR agency. They had the husband of Natalie Massenet, who set up the Pret-a-Porter women's high fashion websites. They've had quite a few rounds of investment, and the Andy Murray thing, I'm not entirely sure, but from what I've read, seems to be part endorsement, and partly they've given him a chunk of the business as well to be able to afford to get the product on him and use him as the catalyst for them. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're staffed up against it and you've got the supply chain in place to be able to cope with it. I mean, if you think of the quantities, the shift in quantities and the requirements of a supply chain to be, when you first launch it, it's a fairly small range of products, mega export by sportswear standards, mega expensive, probably pretty low quantities as a result of all of that, and also to help get the brand launched at the right level of, you know, inaccessibility, if you like. To then be talking about 150,000 replica Villa shirts, 150,000 replica Newcastle shirts, a couple of thousand replica Wolves shirts. That's probably why Wolves are making it themselves. Some old biddy in Bilston just putting them together herself because the quantities are so small. But no, it's not fair of me to say my mom's a Wolves supporter. She'd kill me if I say that.
Is she the one that's, and she's the one who's putting them together, is it?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You
Yeah,
just
that's where I learned it all from. And then just the undertaking of the people on the ground that work with the clubs. You know, the number of people, when I've worked at places like Puma and Umbro under Nike ownership and getting to see how Nike do things, the number of people that are involved in making sure that the kit's there at the right time, and, you know, not even thinking about selling to the fans, just to service the club at every level, men's, women's, kids, coaches, you know, all sorts. It's a massive, massive undertaking. And I think, I mean, the first season Castore got into football, certainly in Britain with Rangers, you know, there were big issues where there was stuff showing up in the Rangers club shop with Castore on the front and Umbro back neck labels within it. There were people buying replicas and getting pro shirts, buying pro shirts and getting replicas because they'd been packaged in the wrong bags, and there was all sorts going wrong. And, you know,
how does the Umbro and Castore thing happen? Do they, like, is there a potential that they reused material?
No, it just would be made in the same factory, and there's been a mistake made somewhere. Purely that. So, which, you know, you would normally not expect in a high tier factory. I think the factory that they were working with when they made their first collection, you know, you probably wouldn't put football shirts through there because they'd be too expensive. But you wouldn't get any mistakes on it. But obviously, the quicker you try and jam something through a supply chain, not just within clothing, within any industry, the more likely you are to get mistakes. You know, as Henry Ford is credited as saying, if your triangle is basically speed, quality, and price, you can pick two, and it totally stands up. You know, if you want something that's inexpensive but you want it to be high quality and quick, you know, you've got no chance. You can't have all three. So, yeah, hopefully that things are settling down from what I've heard within the company. They've kind of done the hard yards and getting themselves onto a straight path. But there's a lot of rumor and suggestion that Mike Ashley could be involved behind the scenes of the business. There's nothing formal to suggest that. It's, you know, largely based on the fact that Rangers and Newcastle were the first two clubs that they worked with. So I don't know how much substance there is to that as a rumor. And then the other suggestion is that the business is being built up as quickly as possible to be able to be sold to investors or to float, and having all these assets then means that whoever buys the business can choose where they want to focus it. So yeah, it's unusual, but I think equally it's hard to try and second guess what's going on because it is so unusual. But, you know, credit to them, they set up a business 7 years ago and now they're dressing the greatest football club of all time.
You said it. And the greatest. Wait a minute, what else do they do? I saw something there. Taekwondo, GB Taekwondo they do as well. They do Saracens, Mavericks, netball. They're in rugby league. They do the Samoan, the United States rugby union teams. McLaren, we mentioned, they sponsor Matt Fitzpatrick in the golf. Must have got a good chunk off him. Didn't he win something recently as well? Team Bahrain, victorious in the cycling. Kent County Cricket Team, England, South Africa, and West Indies. Coming from next year, they have Bayer Leverkusen, they have Genoa, they have Sevilla, they've got Almeria. And from the 2023-24 season, they have Feyenoord, along with our good selves, Salford City, MK Dons, Newcastle United, Wolverhampton Wanderers, Charlton Athletic, Rangers, and Aussie Rules. They're an Aussie Rules too with the West Coast Eagles, if that floats anybody's boat as well, from that point of view. So they've been, as I say, like it's pretty aggressive strategy. And even looking at their Wikipedia page, I don't know, Tom Singh, the founder of New Look, he might he's involved as well. So I don't know. I'm not even sure what New Look is. But but no, it's interesting to get your background in that, because it's one thing that kind of struck me straight away, that like, they're such a young brand, and to have that kind of market presence at the moment, I wasn't sure whether it was normal or not for that to happen. But
yeah, well, I think even just the nature of, again, what I've heard is the relationship with Wolves is very unique in that they're kitting out the team in terms of on pitch and sidelines, and getting the presence on pitch with their actual product, and then obviously Wolves have got license to be able to be making the replica of that themselves and selling it themselves, and then I would presume Castore are taking a royalty off that. So I think that there's probably two groups of people benefiting there. There's Castore will be benefiting because it's no stress on their supply chain. Everything's being managed by somebody else. And as we've seen, the Wolves fans, where the prices have been compared between what Wolves fans are paying for the training line and what Villa fans are paying, and that's simply just the nature of economy. It's got nothing to do with Villa being greedy or Castore or Fanatics or anybody. It's Wolves make the product and pay X amount for a training jacket from the factory. They add their upcharge, and then the next person that buys it is the fan. Whereas with most relationships, the brand buys it from the factory, sells it to the retailer, and the retailer sells it to the fan. So it's effectively Wolves supporters are paying wholesale price, which clearly works for the duration of this agreement. But I don't know how many other brands would sign up to that, of not having full control over product that's going out with their logo on it. So for a Wolves fan, I wouldn't try and get too used to paying 30 quid for a training jacket or whatever the asking price is.
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting piece. I was staying away from prices, but you strayed into it yourself, because usually people come alive when you start talking about prices.
Yeah, there's no
things like that.
Yeah, I think with the price of these, I've seen some feedback that obviously the price has gone up from where we were at with Kappa. The nature of the football shirt industry is that people look back and seem to forget, you could get a replica shirt for 35 quid 30 years ago. But 30 years ago, 35 quid was still a good chunk of change. I think when Admiral put the first replica kit on Leeds United, and it was, I forget, it was a £5 or £7 or whatever. If you calculate that back through inflation to what that would be now, it's not too far off what we're paying for football shirts now, and the cost of making them, and they're being shipped from the other side of the world, etc. It is all relative. And last season, if people have talked about Kappa are rubbish, I wish we'd got Nike or Adidas or whatever, fans of their teams were paying 65 quid last season. And there's some suggestion that if not this summer, potentially next summer, a lot of the bigger brands are going to put the prices up to 75 quid at retail for a replica, and maybe 130 or 140 for a pro level shirt. Paying £9.35 for a kilogram of Lurpak these days, aren't we, in the UK? So, makes 65 quid for a Villa shirt feel like a bargain compared to that.
I saw somebody do a price comparison for if you were to buy it in dollars in the States. So if you were to buy it in dollars in the States and do a price comparison and get it shipped to the States and then get it shipped from the States back to Ireland, I think you can save yourself something like 90 cents in euros if you want to do it that way, guys. So if you're that hungry after the 90 cents, there might be something in that. If you aren't part of the North American Villa Lions clubs, I think somebody had something up there, and then I went away and I did the maths and I found I could save myself less than £1. But It's where the goal is, right? Yeah. Although for that, I could get a €20 return flight to Birmingham, fly over, buy it in the club shop, and come back and still have a few pints on the way, and that would be fine by me as well. So I suppose I'll have to juggle it up. See
Just with
what
regard
happens.
to the shorts themselves, Rob, do you envisage there's been any decline? Because I just look at the shops here in Ireland, and I wonder have clubs and manufacturers priced themselves too high? You'd walk into a normal sport shop here in Ireland, and you could get 20, 30 different teams, jerseys, all there for purchase. And now you're looking at Liverpool, Man United, Ireland, couple more if you're lucky, Barcelona, PSG, all these fashionable ones. But you don't get to walk in now and buy a Villa shirt or a Newcastle shirt, or even it's tough enough to get the likes of Arsenal and Spurs, who will be quite popular. So I'm wondering, have you seen any decline in the amount of people actually purchasing shorts? Because it's not something you'd see at Villa Park, obviously, because anyone that goes will obviously purchase them.
Yeah, it's going to be a two-pronged thing, Paddy. I think that you've got the retailers themselves. When they buy the shirts from the brand, they're taking the risk that those shirts are going to sell. So, buying a handful of Villa shirts, who certainly, as recently as a couple of years ago, we could have a dreadful season, win 4 games and get relegated, and then they're sat there with a load of Villa shirts that they've paid for and can't shift. So for them, retailers are typically going to be hedging their bets. We've also seen a change in strategy from some of the brands, where the brands are more inclined to want to sell the product directly to the fan rather than selling it through third-party retailers, because obviously there's more money to be made. If you think back to how I've just described how the Wolves relationship is working, if take a let's use Castore and Villa as a simple example. So if Castore pay X at the factory and then they sell it directly to the fan at 65 quid, everything in between is their profit. Similarly with Villa, Castore pay X at the factory, Fanatics or whoever's running the Villa club shop pays X for it from Castore and then sells it to the fan. So all that profit then goes to essentially the club shop. Whereas if it's sold from Castore to a local sports retailer somewhere in Ireland and then gets sold to the fan, or the brand have only made a small amount and the club have only made a percentage of the overall sales price. So as far as the brand and the club are concerned, there's way more cash available by selling it only through the club shop or the brand's own website. So a lot of shirts have restricted the availability because of that. With the clubs that you've mentioned, quite often the club will, they will drive because they want the visibility. They know the shirts will sell. They're happy to take a small percentage because they're selling millions of shirts. So for them, it's more about the exposure than it is about the cash. But clubs our size don't sell as many shirts as you might think, and so every tenner on a shirt makes a big difference to a club of our size.
Interesting.
Fair enough.
Rob, we've kept you longer than I had originally agreed with. Yeah. So what we're going to do is, Rob, thanks so much for popping on. Before you go, marks out of 10 based on a photograph. What do you think?
Oh man, well, we usually do marks out of 11 on our show, don't we? So if you haven't seen it, do go to YouTube and look for the Spark Design Academy channel. But yeah, I don't know, it's feeling like it's probably going to get a 6 or a 7 until I get my hands on it, and I reserve the right to adjust that accordingly, because if that's inexpensive fabric with, certainly talking from a replica and fewer details on it, that's not going to be cool. Whereas if that's beautifully put together and it's really nice material and it's a simple pared back design, then we could be in for an all-time classic. But yeah. The proof of the pudding will be in the polyester.
Exactly, yeah, and you can see the little kind of ripples that go through it there, and I think that's kind of what has me looking at to see, well, will that be decent quality? So, like you, I'd like to get my hands in it, but I just like to get my hands in it because I want to wear it. You want to get your hands in it to give your critical eye over it, which is fantastic.
Exactly.
Paddy, what would you give it out of 10?
I'm quite happy with it and quite content. Obviously, the price point and those 3 words underneath the kazoo is what's putting me off. So for that reason, I'm going to give it a 7.5.
I'm going to give it a 10 because we're going to be lifting the FA Cup in it at the end of the season, and then everyone will be going back going, I always loved that jersey. I always have great memories from that jersey. So that's why I'm giving it a 10.
And I think that's the important thing, that a jersey can leave a legacy depending on what the players do in it. Like that black Kappa jersey that we did so well in. Everybody bought it towards the back end of the season because we had so many good results in it. When we beat Liverpool 7-2, there was a big uptake in jerseys as well. So all of these things come into effect. As Rob said earlier, if we have an awful season like we did a few years ago, then we don't sell many jerseys, and I certainly don't buy one. So there you go.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, listen, thanks everybody so much for watching. Most of all, thank you so much, Rob, for your time. As I say, I've taken up way too much of your time on Friday afternoon. Everybody, please go and look at the Spark Academy. Please check them out on Twitter, YouTube, where else are you guys, Rob? I feel like I'm going to undersell you.
YouTube, Instagram at the moment, but we've got a few more things bubbling away in the background that we're hoping to be able to tell the world about in the future.
Excellent. And sit down and watch them, because they do a really good in-depth kind of analysis of jerseys, and it's great crack. There's some really good funny pieces in there as well. So everybody, you should go and watch it. And I'm really interested to see what you guys do when you get your hands on the actual shirt itself. But thanks everybody so much for popping in. Please give this a thumbs up if you did like this show. We will be back again. I might actually be back again later on this evening. We will have a team sheet tantrum again tomorrow. And then on Sunday, I've got something nice lined up as well with regards to the academy. So don't go anywhere over the course of the weekend. I've beat the virus and I'm back on podcasts. So that's so keep the bell clicked there on YouTube, and we'll be talking to you over the next few days. And I suppose with that, all that's left to say is up the Villa.
Up the Villa.
Up the Villa.